Okie dokie, we are live. Let's dim down the brightness a bit. There we go. Okay, so wait for some people to get in here. If you are watching the recording, we are here live every Sunday from 11:30 a.m. until 1:30 p.m. California time. So you can catch the next one. Let's see what we have for comments before we get some people in here. I'm working currently on a big intonation lesson, which is probably going to be the last big lesson in the pronunciation course. Okay, comments. Do you have anybody yet? Nope. You guys can say hi. You can just let me know if you have any questions, whatever you want. We have two recent questions that I haven't quite gotten to yet. We could talk about those. So one from Peter Fyong. Probably said that horribly. Sorry. Let's see if I can paste this. It might be a little long. Yeah, it's a little long. Okay. Let's see. On YouTube. I understand limiting the chat, but for me as the creator, it seems a bit weird. Or still too much. Second part and the rest of it. Okay. Wendell, welcome. Here as every Sunday. Thanks for all your help. Yes, very good. And thanks for coming once again. Glad to see you here. Let me know if you have questions. I'm going to start off by answering this question from somebody else who left a comment on the lesson about the 4D sounds of American English. So I'll also paste this for context. Video started playing and it says da 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 at the beginning, and I was going to say context, but because I was seeing da, I want to say context, and that didn't work. Okay, so it's a question about this video, and this person says, I was taught that T and D between two vowels should be pronounced as a flap T and flap D. That's already one thing that is technically wrong from my viewpoint, but let's continue. The word produce has a D between two vowels, but it's not pronounced as a flap D. It's pronounced as a regular D. Is that right? What about a sentence? Maybe the sentence. I need to do it. I know that need to becomes needa when saying to do it because there's a D between two vowels. Can I use the flap D? Okay, so let's sort this out. There's a couple things here. First thing is, as I've said many times in the live stream and a couple lessons, there is no flap T. Flap T does not exist. Okay, I'm going to put this here. Flap T does not exist. Exclamation point. Okay. Now, the reason why I say that, most teachers, when the T in American English, when it turns into a flap, if it's written with a T, they'll call it a flap T. If it's written with a D, they'll call it a flap D. That's technically okay, except remember, we want to, especially in English, we want to separate sounds from symbols. It's very, very important. So when a D or a T, it doesn't matter if it's written with a D or a T in the spelling, when it flaps, there is only one sound that is produced, and that is a voiced sound. D is the voiced one, so it's a flap D. Okay, we never do like hata hata hata. That would be a flap T. Hata hata hata, something like that. Okay, it doesn't exist. Okay, it turns into a flap D regardless of how it's spelled. So that's the first point. Some people think that's not important. I do. So we'll move on from there. Next, the word produce has a D between two vowels. That is correct, but it's not pronounced as a flap D. It's pronounced as a regular D. That is correct. Why? That's the question. Now, I'm pretty sure I addressed this in the lesson that the comment is on, but for everybody here, and to reiterate, yes, you need a T or a D, right, between two vowels. That's true. But not if it is at the start of a stressed syllable, because remember, you have to understand. You have to understand. La fonética del inglés es demasiado compleja. Yes and no, Juan. Yes and no. He says the phonetics of English are too complex. Not quite. Part of my job is to make it simpler for you. By getting rid of a lot of the noise, like flap T. It doesn't exist. Okay. Anyway, I don't think I did a good job of this in the lesson, but it's a point that should be reiterated over and over again. So you guys, right? Most teachers teach rules, rules, this, that, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, and that's fine. Learning some rules is very, very useful. That's good. But there's usually a reason for the rules. Okay, now it depends on what kind of rules we're talking about. When it comes to like spelling rules and stuff, we know the spelling system is all messed up. Okay, whatever. But when it comes to actual sounds, like why do certain sound changes happen? Or why do we use one type of D versus another type of D in a particular case? Okay. There's often a reason, okay, a physiological, mechanical reason based on what's going on in the mouth. And obviously, because there's many different pronunciations across many different languages, there's many ways to make sounds with your vocal tract. There's many possible variations of things, but we're talking about within the context and scope of American English, what usually happens. Okay. So when we're talking about, see, now this person said regular D. Okay. There's two kinds of regular Ds. You can't just say it's a regular D. Okay. There's aspiration, which just means you have more breath, you have more force of breath. Okay. And there's unaspiration, right, where it's not aspirated. And that's where you don't push out as much breath. You still produce the sound, but you don't push out as much breath. Oh, it's Mexican. It's pesos. $30. I saw $30. I was like, wow, that's a lot. But yes, no, thank you very, very much for that. I appreciate it, Maguaz. We got the pom-poms cheering. That's a weird little character there. I don't even, it has like a leaf for a head. What is that, a fruit? Or I don't even know what that is, but okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, the donation. Okay, so there's aspiration and unaspiration. Okay, so when we have this is easier when we don't talk about T and D, because T and D has the flap in addition, where like P and B don't. So this applies to the stop sounds, right? Because in order to create them, we have to stop the flow of air in some way and then push it out based with the lips, the tongue here, the tongue here, right? Okay, so if we have, for example, a strong P, if we have a weak P, so strong is aspiration, right? That's another way that I make this easier for you guys. Instead of using these technical terms like aspiration, what does that mean? It just means it's stronger. You push it out more. Okay. So if we have a strong P, pick. Okay. If we have a weak P, it's not aspirated. There's not as much force of breath. You still go into a P, you still release it, but you don't push it out, right? It's just but happy. It's not happy and it's not thick. Okay. You have to use the right one. But why? There's a reason why. It's not just like, oh, this word uses this P and this word uses that P. No, there's a reason. Hello, Finn. Welcome to the chat. I don't know if you're waving or if you have a question. You're raising your hand because you have a question. Either way, let me know your question. I'll work through this. But there's a reason why we use a particular stop sound, paba, tada, kaga. Reason why we use a particular one in particular places. And that reason is the stress. The stress. Think about it. If you think about the physical mechanics here, and I'm going to keep with the P for a second just because it's simpler. If I go into a P, if I close my lips, I go into a P. If it's at the start of a stressed syllable, what happens with the stress? The stress needs to be louder. It needs to be longer. I don't know what I was doing here, but it needs to be louder. It needs to be longer. And hello, Abdullah. Welcome. So what happens to the P, because it's a stop sound, right? I stop that flow of breath, but then I need that stress. I need that loud and long P. You're going to hear that breath behind it. Okay. It's the physical mechanics of creating a stop sound combined with stress. What happens if you remove that stress? Well, we're not going to push it out. It's still going to be produced, but it's not going to be pushed out with a bunch of breath. Happy, happy. That P is at the start of an unstressed syllable. Okay. So there's a reason. So when we talk about a regular D, okay, the thing about T and D, unfortunately, as I already said, flap T does not exist. It becomes a flap D. So that's where T is a little special and a little seemingly complicated. It's really not. But if it's a T or a D, there's two weak versions. Okay. There's the strong T at the start of a stress syllable, like time. Strong D at the start of a stress syllable, like dime. Okay. Then, or here, produce. Okay. The reason why that D is a regular D, why it's a strong aspirated D, is because do or deuce is the stressed syllable. It doesn't matter if it's inside the word or at the start of the word or whatever, it's at the start of a stressed syllable. So you cannot flap it. Maybe if you're speaking really, really, really fast, you can break that. We need to produce more, produce more. But that's the realm of fast speed, like really fast speed, where everything starts to kind of break, right? Or a lot of things start to break and weird things happen. In the flow of normal speech, even faster normal speech, and especially down here in the clear enunciated version, you can't flap a strong D. Okay, there are a couple exceptions, like the word do, if it's stressed, if it's a main verb. It can happen with that, probably because it's just such a common word. But in general, you can't just randomly change a strong D, aspirated D, into a flap D, because a flap D is the second type of weak D. A normal weak D happens generally if it's at the start of an unstressed syllable. If it's at the end of a word and you don't stop it, because it's possible to push it out, but often we'll stop it. But if it is pronounced at the end of a word, if it's at the start of an unstressed syllable, but there's not two vowels, there's not a vowel before and a vowel after, it'll be a regular weak D. So instead of duh, it'll just be duh, duh, duh. It's just not as strong. If you have a vowel and a vowel, and that D is at the start of an unstressed syllable, it becomes flapped. Same thing with a T. It's at the start of an unstressed syllable, it becomes flapped. Okay. The other case where it flaps is if there's a vowel before it, it's at the end of the word, and the next word starts with a vowel as well. It doesn't matter if that word is stressed or not. Anytime that a consonant connects to a vowel at the start of the next word, it's the weaker version of that consonant. Okay. So if I say pick up, it's not going to be pick up. It's going to be pick up, pick up, pick up. Okay. So we would use the flap there because there's still that two vowels. Okay, there's the two vowels, and it's still remaining a weak D when it connects to the vowel, so it becomes a flap D. So if I say, I don't know, bad if, or what if, spelled with a T, what if, same thing. Okay. And then to finish this up here, what about in the sentence, I need to do it? So need to, yes, can become needa. That's normal. If you're speaking more slowly, it's not really going to happen. But that's very common, yes. When saying to do it, because there's a D between two vowels, can I use a flap D? Yeah, so as I briefly mentioned, with some special words like do, even if they're stressed, you can often go ahead and just flap it anyway, unless you give it emphasis. Like if you say, I need to do it, you're not going to flap it. But if you say, I need to do it, I need to do it, need to do, need to do, need to do, need to do, it's perfectly fine in that particular case, yes. Okay, so moving on. We already chat is filling up. Very nice. I like it. There was another question in the comments recently that I'll get to if we have a lull, but first I have to catch up. So, Delio, yes. Sorry, Delio, I forgot to say hi. I see you there. Not ignoring you, I promise. Wendell, how do you normally and naturally pronounce this sentence emphasizing the pronoun me? I think we had this. Yeah, so we had this question last time. Yeah, I remember, Wendell, you came at the end and I didn't get to answer all your questions. I know I talked about this particular question. Maybe you were busy writing other questions and you didn't hear me explain that one, but okay. So the question is about, is the preposition to fully pronounced? So it doesn't matter if you're emphasizing me or not. That has nothing to do with the preposition to. Okay. I think I know what you're thinking. Like you're thinking like to me. Okay. It's possible that they could be sort of linked in a backwards way that way, because you're emphasizing, as a way of further emphasizing me, you're emphasizing the to, because you're saying, well, it goes to me, right? I'm the end point. So emphasizing that preposition and the logic or meaning underneath that preposition, which is an end point, is very natural to do. Do you have to do that? No, it's absolutely not required. Can it happen? Yes, it's perfectly fine. The thing with the preposition to, it's almost always reduced to ta, right? We know that t can maybe disappear or change into a d depending on what's going on. But the oo will almost always reduce to It's always possible that the oo can come out. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't matter. It's just not, it's statistically not likely. Okay, so if you happen to say to, it's probably not going to stand out. Probably going to be normal, as long as you're not giving it like stress or emphasis. It's just like talking to me, talking to me, to me, to me, to me. That's fine. But if you always do that, then, especially because it's a common word, it's going to stand out in your speech and it's going to start to sound unnatural, right? So it's more a game of statistics. You know, more often than not, you should be saying ta instead of to. Although, if the next sound is a vowel, we can take advantage of the O to vowel linking rule with a small w. Or sorry, not O. I see a letter O. And I mean oo, because the oo sound too. Whether it's an O or an oo, there's this small w linking rule going into the next vowel. So that makes it a little more likely that we might say oo instead, but you could still always say it's kind of whatever comes out. So in many ways, English pronunciation, particularly American English pronunciation, is a game of statistics, right? Because there's a dynamic range of what can happen, but the full pronunciation is always possible. And so it's kind of a game of statistics of what's most likely to come out, not what has to come out. Okay, is there any pronunciation rule to pronounce to in I need to talk to you or I'm talking type of there talking to you? Is to in both cases fully pronounced or is it a choice? Yeah, so again, another example, most cases, so it is a choice, but I wouldn't even think of it as a choice necessarily. Usually it's just statistics. It's what is most likely, what is a native most likely to pronounce for the word to, right? If you have, say, they say it 10 different times through the flow of speech in random sentences, more than likely, how is it going to come out? Is it going to be oo or is it going to be It's probably going to be Okay. And then again, the T, we know, can change depending on what's around it. With need to, it can change into needa. The T disappears, the D links, becomes a flat D, needa. I need to talk to you. Okay. So we know the T has even more possibilities instead of just reducing or not reducing. Okay. Do average people in informal speech use differentiate or any other verb? I think you mean any other verb to mean differentiate. So basically the question is differentiate a word that is used in informal speech? And this goes back to a point that I made before. I actually need to make a lesson on this. American English, yes, we have formality, but mostly we don't really have formal language and informal language. We have standard politeness and informal language. There are some things that will sound maybe more formal, whether that's relative between the polite and the informal, or it'll actually sound kind of stiff and like maybe dated, like it's from an earlier time. Like you mustn't go that way. Mustn't, like must not. That contraction does exist, but most people don't really use it anymore because it sounds very stiff and formal and older. So differentiate is a little bit more, it's kind of a fancy sounding word. Yeah. But it's a perfectly normal word. You can use it in informal speech just fine. I think what sounds a little more informal relatively, it's not like absolutely this is more informal sounding, it's just like relatively compared to each other, would be like to tell the difference between two things. Use that phrase instead, to tell the difference between two things, instead of differentiate between two things. But they're interchangeable. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. Finn, finding out who's the killer. Oh yeah, by the way, Abdullah, I know you have that question. That was the other question I was going to get to. If I have a moment, I can answer it for you here. But we'll see if I catch up. If not, I will be answering your question in the comment that you left on that one video. So finding out who's the killer or finding out who the killer is. Good question. There's one right answer, which is the second one. However, I'm kind of torn on this point only because I've noticed more and more native speakers, or if they're not natives, their pronunciation is really spot on and they're just throwing me off. But I've noticed more and more native speakers of British English and American English doing this, and maybe I'm wrong and it's technically not wrong. I don't know, but the sentence structure that I always learned that sounds normal to me, that I was taught is correct, is if you have this type of structure, it's who the killer is. Because if you say who is, that would be a question, right? So if I say, and you can contract it, right? Say, who's the killer? Question mark. That's perfectly fine. That's the word order for the question. As soon as you take a WH question word and you put it into a statement where now it's linking, it's sort of like that, right? Linking between two ideas. But it serves a specific role in this case to point to a person because it's who. So if you finding out who, okay, now if you say who is, you're putting a question inside the state. You're putting the question structure inside the statement structure, and that's broken grammar. It doesn't work. You're supposed to say, like if I say that is who the killer is, I wouldn't say that is who's the killer. That sounds really bad in that case. In this particular sentence, I can imagine a native saying the first one, even though I would say it's very wrong. That's why I'm kind of torn on it. I would very strongly recommend the second one. But I think it's because I think there's, I don't even know the right word. It's sort of, I don't want to say backlash because that's not the right word. There's like some backwards influence, like so English has, this is my theory, English has spread across the world. like a virus, right? And so many people have been learning English for so long. And then we have all this, like the internet and all the social media and all this stuff. And I think that maybe there are some native speakers who are uneducated who would use the first option naturally. And so maybe it does exist within the realm of native speakers. Just it's a minority. However, I think that could be maybe part of it. My main theory is that because of social media and the internet, because English has gone so far, and now we English speakers are being exposed more and more to non-native speakers speaking English and making these common grammar mistakes, because this is a super, the first option, that is one of the single most common grammar mistakes that non-native speakers make. It's keeping the question structure in the statement instead of changing it to the statement structure with the WH words. I see it all the time from non-native speakers. And it's such a big problem, in fact, that it's going to be built into my beginner course from the very beginning. But that aside, I think that we have actually started to become influenced by non-native speakers, and it's actually starting to affect the way that we're speaking a little bit, because it's so common and we hear it so much from non-natives. So I don't know, maybe my theory is wrong. Sometimes if you use this wrong structure, like in the first case, it's going to sound horrible. Like when I said, that is who's the killer, that just sounds like no, I can't imagine a native speaker ever saying that. Like that, it feels really weird and awkward. But in some cases, like finding out who's the killer, that doesn't feel as awkward for some reason. It still doesn't sound right to me. I would still not recommend it. So there's some structures, for whatever reason, some contexts or sentences where it's not going to seem as bad. But I would very strongly recommend not doing that. I would use the second option, finding out who the killer is. Anyway, so moving on. Good question, Finn. Very good question. The best way to learn a language is by communicating with people. Can I also say the best way to learn a language is communicating with people? Yeah, so this one I briefly answered before I left last time. The by is, it's optional to say. It will still work in the background. One of the things that happen, not all the time with prepositions, obviously we need prepositions. They show the relationship between two things. They need to be there. But a relatively common thing that can happen with prepositions, or even certain words like that, the grammar word that, linking like, I think that he's right, I think he's right. We don't actually need to say that, although you can, we usually don't. There's some prepositions in some contexts where the purpose and use of that preposition is so obviously embedded in the phrase and the context itself that saying the preposition is optional. So, right, you say the best way to learn a language is by, right? How, what, well, we say what is the best way to learn a language, but we're asking how, like, what should I do? How should I do it in order to learn the language in the best way, right? What is the path? And so we say, okay, by. Okay, that's a very natural preposition to use there. But if I say the best way to learn a language is communicating with people, so the idea of how, like the path, what is the path I should take to learn a language in the best way? That's the underlying concept here. Even though we're not using the word path, we're not using, well, we are using the word way, which is very closely tied to path. And in fact, the logic of by is a path or way. If I remember how I did it. But that's sort of the core idea in a very abstract way. So because we're talking about the best way to learn a language, the by is implied. Generally. So hopefully that makes sense of why it works in this case. But yes, there are cases like this where you can drop the preposition and it's still there in the background. It's not like it technically, it doesn't completely disappear. It's still working. It's just we don't have to actually say it in this case. We were running out of juice at the wedding party. Is the sentence correct to mean the juice in the party was getting reduced and finished? Yeah. Yeah, that's what run out means. That's the most common use of run out. If you use run out, most people would still call it a phrasal verb. I would not define it as a phrasal verb because it doesn't fit the criteria of what a phrasal verb should be. Literally, to run out would be like, say you're in a room and you leave that room, you go outside of that room by running. You are running out of the room from the inside to the outside. That I would not consider a phrasal verb. That's just run plus where are you running? Well, to the outside of the room. But if we use running out as an actual phrasal verb, the most common meaning of run out is something is either in the process of reducing to the point where it disappears, or it has. If we say we have run out or we ran out, then it's gone. So it's a weird phrasal verb. I think I talked about that in the book and I explained it. I don't remember how I explained it. I'd have to think about it again or look it up in my book because, that's how things work. But there's a logical reason why we use run and out in that case. Even though it seems very weird because it's the thing that is running out. It's disappearing, right? But it's like, how can, like, if I have I don't know, water in the fridge, how can water run? Water doesn't run anywhere, right? It doesn't go anywhere. So, but it does exist. It does work. Can around my neck come out as around my neck? Same diphthong, just switch the N and D for an M. Yes, absolutely. There's several things going on there, but yes, that's absolutely no problem. It's very, very normal linking. Of course, you're dropping the at the beginning, which is also something that can happen, especially in faster speech. Again, if you're on the slower end, slower end of normal, probably still okay to do this. Not really an issue, but if you're in that more enunciated area that you say, "Oh yeah, I don't want this around my neck," and now it kind of sounds like you're an uneducated Southerner, right? Stereotypical. So, yeah. Fernando, welcome. What do you mean with speaking more breathy? Do English speakers spit more than other people when talking? No. So, well, spit and breath are two completely different things. But okay. It seems, which the more that I learn about the mouth posture and mechanics of other languages, working with people and exploring languages myself, which I'm not currently doing much of the exploring at this point, just working with other people. But the more that I get exposed to how other languages work, the more American English in particular, not just English, because British English actually seems to work in many ways similar to, say, Spanish in terms of the posture. But American English seems to be sort of the weird one. There are probably other languages that are kind of like American English, but when I talk about being more breathy or using more breath, right? So if I go to Spanish, it's a very small, subtle thing. It's a very small, subtle thing, okay? If I say, for example, and I verified this with my old Spanish partner, like a week or two ago, and I was just like blown away by how accurate this is. Just by using too much breath, even if I was hitting the sound perfectly, just by using too much breath, I didn't sound Spanish. I sounded a little weird. So, for example, if I say, like, I want to go to the beach in Spanish, right? If I say, like, with English breath, so if I say, basically, I'm going to try to use like American posture, American breath, American everything, but I'm just going to speak Spanish, right? Quiero ir a la playa. Quiero ir a la playa. Quiero ir. So I'm still trying to hit Spanish sounds. Like, I'm not trying to sound like quiero ir a la playa, but I'm not using the Spanish mouth posture. I'm not using the Spanish breath. I'm trying to sound Spanish with the wrong posture, right? And the wrong breath. Quiero ir a la playa. Now, I sound really weird, or not really weird. I was going to say really good. Most people will tell you, yeah, it sounds great. If you listen to the breath, it's a very, very subtle thing. Quiero ir a la playa. Playa. playa, 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 playa. There's this little extra breath where if I say more like quiero ir a la playa, quiero ir a la playa, playa, quiero ir a la playa, not quiero ir a la playa. There's this little extra breath when we're speaking English. And this won't be universally true at every single moment. People who have a little bit more of a vocal fry probably don't do this quite as much. Um, so there's maybe a little variation, but in general, American English will tend to use a little more breath. So um, if I were to maybe try to use Spanish breath and say, I want to go to the beach, I say like, which is going to be kind of weird because I don't want to try to change the sounds and sound Spanish. I still want to try to sound English, but just change the breath. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. See, I don't know how clear you can hear that, but it feels a little restricted. It's very subtle. Again, it's a very small difference, but it feels a little restricted. Kind of like things are just like sort of trapped a little bit in my vocal tract. I want to go to the beach. Or if I say, I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. Okay. And we'll raise your volume very, very slightly, but it's not about raising your volume. It's about letting a little more airflow go. And that's why that's a big reason why in the mouth posture course, phase 0 talks about the throat, because it seems that many languages hold the throat maybe a little more closed. The tongue tends to usually be pushed forward, which pulls the throat up just a little bit. And so everything is kind of, I don't know, if we're like here, everything is kind of like this a little bit. So this kind of closes up a little bit, pulls up a little bit, pushes forward a little bit. Where in American English, you need it to be more like that. Okay. And it's not about pushing anything. It's not about trying to force your voice into a particular point or your vocal tract into a particular thing. There is a basic tension in all languages and all dialects. American English has a little bit of tension as well. The schwa is not completely relaxed. Perhaps within the context of the American English mouth posture, it would be the relaxed center of gravity. Yes, it feels relaxed to us, but there is still a basic tension underlying it. And so with the throat, if it's not just getting that throat more open, but it's also being able to use just a little bit more breath. And this becomes very, very important with the stop sounds, like I was talking about earlier. So like P, there's the strong P and the weak P. If you just have but, and that's your P sound in your language, like it's very, very common, especially for like Vietnamese speakers. That's what usually comes to my mind from like a culture standpoint. But a lot of Asian speakers, especially Vietnamese speakers, when they're speaking English, if they have this thick accent, right, they only use like one P. So if they say happy, it's going to sound probably pretty good. It's going to sound fine because there's not a lot of breath there. There shouldn't be a lot of breath there. There should still be about the same amount of breath through as we have through the language, which is maybe a little more than you might use in your language. But then there's the strong P, which needs a little extra breath on top of that because it's at the start of a stressed syllable. So you'll get a lot of Asian speakers, again, specifically, especially Vietnamese speakers, where instead of saying pick, they'll say pick, pick, pick. There's no breath there. It's just it sounds very unnatural. Still understandable, but it's one of the it's very clear accent there. Like if everything else was perfect, but you just did that with your P's and your T's when they're supposed to be strong, it's going to ruin your accent. It's going to stand out very, very clearly to us. So anyway, long answer to a relatively easy question, but that's what I mean when I'm talking about you need to be a little more breathy. You use a little bit more breath. You don't want to do it too much. We don't speak like this. It's way too much. Okay. I have exercises in phase 0 and phase 1 that will help you get better control over the breath and figure out how to get it more to that American English level. But if you pay very, very close attention to how much breath is flowing through the speech of, say, speakers of your language versus American speakers, you'll probably start to notice that there's a little difference in the breath. Okay. We need the breath in English for the sounds. The sounds flow on the breath. Okay. We don't want the breath to overpower the sounds. but they need to flow out on the sounds. Okay. Okay, Abdullah, you mean like the phrase, I don't know. I can only imagine that was back when I was talking about flapping the D, like in do. But yes, I don't know. That itself is a very common phrase. If that's what you're referring to, yes, you can flap that D, even though don't is stressed. However, remember, if you emphasize it, if you say, I don't know, you're not going to flap it. Okay, that would just be weird. I don't know. See, it breaks the purpose of what you're trying to do. So again, it's statistics, it's context, it depends on the purpose. Pronunciation, all of pronunciation, especially the higher level things like intonation, but in some way, almost all areas of pronunciation in a language are tied to your purpose. Okay, at the lowest level, when we're talking about the basic formation of sounds, it's a little less tied to purpose. That's like literally just the building blocks. But as you go higher and higher up the chain, like through the linking, when we may or may not link, we get up into intonation, we get into like rhythm changes and things like that. That is very, very much more and more influenced by the purpose of your communication. And so you might learn a rule, but that rule is likely going to be contextual in pronunciation. There are very few pronunciation rules that are absolute in American English, relatively speaking, compared to what can happen. Pepsi. No, not even Pepsi. Let me know if you get the reference. Excuse me. I'd be very surprised if you guys got the reference, but if you did, if any Spanish speakers here might get the reference, maybe. But can I say there's a plane going over? Hopefully that's not a problem. Can I say school Ramon Martinez and also Ramon Martinez School, or River Hudson and also Hudson River, like the expression letter A, grade second? Okay. The names of things are usually pretty fixed. Okay. If it's called, like if the school is named after a person like Ramon Martinez, the normal convention in English wouldn't be to put school first. So it would probably end up being named like Ramon Martinez School or the Ramon Martinez School. We might put the before it, and that's fine. But the school is probably going to go last. Like that tends to be what happens. Now there's like, okay, the Ramon Martinez School for adults or for gifted children or for whatever. You can add something else to it, but that section of it is the school is probably not going to be in front of it. When we name things, that tends to be the thing. So it's the Hudson River, the Ramon Martinez School. It's okay, name and then category, you could think. So it's like, okay, what is it? It's a school. What's the name of the school? Ramon Martinez, because it's named after a guy named Ramon Martinez. So it's a Ramon Martinez School. Okay, it's a river. What's the name of the river? Hudson. So it's the Hudson River. It's not the River Hudson. Now, there are some weird things that can happen. There's some, maybe some names break this. Some particular things might be a little flexible, and maybe you could do more than one thing. Possible. But the standard normal thing is where you have like the name and then the object or the category, right? So school, river, whatever. When you say the letter A, yeah, you're talking about the name of the letter, right? It's the letter A. Okay. If you say a letter, that technically does exist. It's possible, but usually, I mean, that would probably be like, if I'm talking about like, oh, this is a letter, right? Like this is an example of a letter, right? Or it could be like actually a written letter, but it could be a letter of the alphabet. I'm just not saying the letter A specifically. Letter A, letter B, letter C. So in that case, A would be article, the article A. Grade second, that actually sounds a little bit weird to me. I can imagine that being said, but we'd probably say second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, etc. So just like Hudson River, first grade, second grade, we tend to do the label and then the thing. So first place, first grade, first person, first kiss, first time in Japan, first, etc. Right? That particular one is a little more flexible. I think maybe I don't know if it's in British English, but I think I've heard it the other way in British English. Anyway, as I said, some things are a little flexible, but the standard is going to be what I said. It's going to be name plus thing. So, and in these particular cases, saying school Ramon Martinez, that doesn't make any sense. Saying the River Hudson, I think for this particular one, the Hudson River, I think some people do actually switch this one. So this one can be more flexible, but the standard thing that we would expect is the Hudson River, not the River Hudson. Yeah. It is no use. Also in no one is coming. The verb form is just pronounced like a Z in the first and in the second like an S, even though is written and not apostrophe S, the contracted form. Okay. Okay. So remember, I was talking about earlier how a lot of things in pronunciation, when we're talking about basic sounds and some sound changes that happen, linking rules, a lot of it is rooted in the physical mechanics of the mouth, okay? And things that we can do to make it easier to speak. So if I say is, okay, yes, it happens to be spelled with an S. Why? Because it's English. We know English spelling is horrible. We don't care why it's spelled with an S. It's spelled with an S. Okay. But it's pronounced with a Z. Okay. Is. It's a Z sound. You can get that partial end of word devoicing, end it with an S after you start the Z. That's fine, but it's supposed to be a Z sound. Now, what happens when we contract? Okay. When you contract it and is, not he is or she is contracted, only it. Okay. What happens to the Z sound? It turns into an S. There's a reason. Okay. It's not just some random rule that you have to memorize. There's an actual physical reason why this happens. Okay. If I contract he and is, he's, he is, he's, we just drop the I, connect the Z sound to the end of he or she if it's she's, and the Z stays. Because the sound before it is a vowel, which is voiced. All vowels are voiced. And so there's no reason to change that sound, right? Why would we change it into he's or she's? Okay, there's no reason for that. But when we say it's, okay, T, which technically the T is an illusion because whenever you have TS, there's actually no T there, but it's affecting the change here. Because we're going into what would be the T position, we're just pushing the S through that. But it's not id, right? It's not ids. Okay, that would be D plus Z, voice plus voice, easier to keep. Okay. When we go into that T position, there's supposed to be a T there, right? If I say it, right, there's a T there. And then we have that what's supposed to be a Z sound after it. But because of the voicelessness of the T, it's a lot easier to kind of just drop the voice and push out an S instead of pushing out a Z. If I were to do a Z, it zzz. See, now there's like a D. It's like, is it a T or a D? It's really hard to separate T and D like that. It's a lot easier to just change the Z into an S so that we know it's a T, right? So that's why the Z will change into an S in that particular case after it. Okay. I was going to say something else about that. What was that? It is, I lost my thought. Anyway, so your question, the verb form, so is just pronounced like a Z in the first and in the second like an S, even though is written in the apostrophe S. Okay. So if you don't contract, It's a Z sound, period. There's no exceptions to that. It is what it is. So, like I just said, it is what it is. Z. It is no use. It is no use. Sounds a little stiff, a little formal. We probably contract, right? Because the contraction is super, super common. That's like 99% of the time what we'll do. But if you don't contract for whatever reason, you're emphasizing or something, that's okay. It is no use. It would be a Z sound. Okay. When we say no one is coming, no one is coming, no one is coming, it's still a Z sound. Now, what you might be hearing, what might be kind of throwing off your ears a little bit, remember that we have this partial end of word devoicing. Okay, most teachers call it end of word devoicing, but it's not a complete change. Okay, where that last voice sound becomes voiceless, you have to start in the voiced version. I've talked about that before, and then you can sort of at the very end let it become voiceless. So instead of saying is, you can say is. Okay, it sort of ends in an S. You just drop that voice before ending the sound. That can happen to any voice consonant at the end of a word. It could be a V, it could be a Z. It doesn't really matter. It could even happen to the stop sounds like D, B. It's a little harder, maybe not, I don't want to say less common per se, but with the stop sounds, it's a little trickier to do. But that can happen to any voice consonant at the end. But you still have to start in that voice sound and then let it transition into the voiceless one. But when we say it is no, okay, N is nasal, but it's still voiced, right? So, of course, we're probably not going to do any end of word devoicing because we're going to hold that voice all the way through the N, right? There's like mechanically, there's no reason. Why would you do the end of word devoicing? Say, is snow. Now it sounds like snow. Is snow. Okay, that could sound like two completely different different word combination. Is snow, right? Why would we do that when N is already voiced? So we just hold that Z. There's no reason to do the end of word devoicing. Is no. Okay, fine. When you say no one is coming, the next sound after is a K, which is voiceless. Okay, if the next sound is voiceless, well, that just makes it a lot easier and a lot more likely that instead of waiting until we finish is to remove the voice and then push out the K, because we don't want to push out a G, it's the voiced version, right? We can actually do that partial end of word devoicing to keep a nice transition flow. So you go I, a little Z, let it drop into S before you release it, and then push out that K. Okay, so you're actually doing like I, Z, S, K. Okay, but the Z is within one thing. It starts in a Z, you drop the voice, and then you push out that K. Is coming. Okay, but there's still a Z there. You cannot completely devoice. You can't say is coming. No one is coming. That would not sound right. That would sound like an accent. So it's still Z, no matter what. If you contract it, it will become an S. If you're saying it is, it's. If you say no one's, okay, you can contract one and is. That's fine. Still a Z. And then if you use this partial end of word devoicing, you still have to start in a Z. Okay, so the Z isn't going to disappear in that case because the sound before it is an N, which is voiced. Okay, you're not contracting with it anymore. It, that T is what makes it, changes it into an S. It's just like if I say, instead of it, if I say the cat is big, the cat's big, that changes that Z into an S again because of the T. Okay. Anyway, I'm way behind now. Spent way too long on that question. But yeah, I think that was important. So anyway, moving on. The other say, I think you mean day. The other day you said Portuguese "nia" wasn't the same as the sound between the words padding it. How come? Remember that in ñ is not like Spanish ñ. It is a nasal semivowel, a nasal Y sound. Yeah, I don't know enough about Portuguese to say for sure. What I learned was that the NH is essentially the same as the Spanish ñ. But regardless, so if it's not the same, then I don't know. I don't know enough about Portuguese to answer that question. What I do know for sure is that you're not going to say padinhet, padinhet, niet. If there's any sort of y in there, it's wrong. Okay, that's not how English works. That's the main point. So if you said it's a nasal Y sound, number one, English doesn't have a nasal Y sound, so it wouldn't exist anyway. Number two, you can't put a Y there. So that's the main problem. Which, by the way, the Spanish ñ, I mean, it's basically an N plus a Y. A nasal Y sound. Oh, I see. Let's see if I say pequeño, pequeño. Yeah, Spanish can do the same thing. They don't have to say like pequeño. They can say pequeño, pequeño. Like it's possible. It probably doesn't sound like clear enunciated Spanish. If there's a Spanish speaker here, say like, yeah, you know. But if you actually were to speak Spanish quickly, just like I'm not fully aware of all the things that happen in super fast English speech, if there's any Spanish speakers here that would take a second to think about fast Spanish speech and what can happen with the ñ, they'd probably agree with me that instead of doing ñ, you can do like pequeño, 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 pequeño. I don't know. Maybe it gives a bit of a Portuguese accent. I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm not a native Spanish speaker. Point is, no Y. You can't put a Y there, so that's the main problem. Okay, if we say letter A, number 7, planet Jupiter, why don't we say River Hudson, River Amazon? Because it's English. Sorry, I'm gonna have to go with a typical horrible teacher answer because it's English. And I don't mean horrible teacher answer. I mean a horrible answer from a teacher. It's how some things are. It's how things are. There's probably a reason, and that reason might be from the etymology, but just because there's a reason for something, see, because I don't want to say just because it's never just because, right? There is always some sort of reason, whether it's logical or not. We know English has a long history, especially if you go back through Middle English and Old English even, because like the word he, it comes from Old English. It's a very, very old word, for example. I think there's like 15 words that we still use from Old English. But anyway, it has a long history. It has a tendency, especially modern English, has a tendency of absorbing things from other languages. It's been heavily influenced by French, so it has like Germanic roots, plus this sort of French and Latin influence that, has impacted largely vocabulary, but there's probably a little bit with the grammar as well. And so for any particular case, right, there's maybe like one pattern that came from one source and another pattern that came from another source or whatever. I don't know. You look at the etymology and there's probably a way to map it all out and explain it. Does it matter? No, it's just some things work that way. Some things work that way. It's in the case of, say, like prepositions, I think because prepositions are so common and they're like a core part of the language, it's very useful to go in and say, okay, what's going on here? In a case like this, it's just the order of the collocation, the combination of words. So just go with it. I'm looking for you. I'm looking at you. Are those coded function words? both in each sentence, fully pronounced in normal speech or weak. That's all things. Okay, so the end of Wendell's questions. I don't know what COTED means. That's not a word, at least as far as I know. Coat. First known use of coat, 12th century. Okay, apparently coat is a word. COTE. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Okay. I'm going to assume it doesn't matter. I think you use it as an adjective anyway. Fully pronounced, fully, not full pronounced, fully, with a Y at the end, in normal speech or weak. Again, it's dynamic. Okay. For is a function word. You is a function word. At is a function word. Obviously, not all words have the same type of reductions or reductions at all, or we might not necessarily think of them as having reductions. So for will almost always reduce to fur. It doesn't have to, but very commonly it does. Okay, it's not about, see, your question is, are they fully pronounced in normal speech, or are they not fully pronounced? I wouldn't call them weak necessarily. I guess you could, but are they fully pronounced or are they not? It depends. If you're down in this fully enunciated, slow, clear speech area, pretty much everything is fully pronounced. Okay, almost everything is fully pronounced. Now, there are certain things that are super, super common, like maybe fur, reducing to ta, reducing a to the to the. That could still probably happen here just because they're so super common and make speaking so much more easy. So much easier. See, I made a mistake. But if you're not down here in this slow, like if you're not talking like this and clearly trying to enunciate almost every little thing that you say, okay, then most likely you're going to have some sort of reduction in these function words. Again, most likely. Your question assumes either or. There is no either or. It doesn't exist. Okay. It's not one or the other. It's not yes or no. It's not black or white. It's what is likely. So for, most likely reduced to fur. You, most likely reduced to ya. At, kind of depends. It can reduce. For various reasons, we don't consciously usually think of at as having a reduction, but it can reduce. And then again, your speed matters. So if you're on the slower end of normal, if you're on the faster end of normal, if you're in really fast speech, obviously things kind of break. We're not going to worry too much about that. Over on this end, for can actually reduce all the way to like fa. It can actually reduce to a schwa. Well, schwa with an F. But if you see another thing where it's dynamic, if you is the last word and you reduce it to ya, it's going to sound very informal. Right? If I say this is for ya, this is for ya, this is for ya, something like that. Like, or I wasn't looking at ya, because the T would probably become cha, at ya. That sounds very informal. But if you is not the last word, and it's just in the flow of speech, it usually reduces to ya. It doesn't have to. It can come out as you at any time that it's pronounced. It's just likely it's going to become ya. So I'm looking for you. I'm looking for you. So that you at the end, you don't have to fully say it necessarily, but you're not going to reduce it to ya. You just make it like a really sort of, that's what I'm looking for. Not reduced, like a lazy ooh. I'm going to be talking about the lazy versions of sounds when we do phase 2 of the mouth posture, the vowel masterclass. But so instead of saying you can say like you. Okay, that's not like in book, like some teachers might say. No, it doesn't become it can pass into that because it can reduce all the way to a schwa potentially. So there's a bit of a line of a range there, but it's a different topic. So I'm looking for you. I'm looking for you. For you. I'm looking at you, at you, at you, at you. Now, if you want to sound a little bit more informal, it's fine. I'm looking for you, for you, for you. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you. Sounds a bit more informal, possible, but it's going to sound more informal in that case. Okay, if you want to hear the sound, look up this thingy. This page on Wikipedia is called nasal palatal approximant. Well, see, the problem with Wikipedia, I think generally Wikipedia is a pretty good resource. These days, I think there's unfortunately some political stuff going on. There was a research paper like 10, 15 years ago said that Wikipedia was as accurate as the Encyclopedia Britannica. So I do think Wikipedia overall is probably a pretty good resource. The problem I have with Wikipedia when it comes to pronunciation is almost every single sound that I listen to when it gives an example of like the IPA symbols, it says, "Oh, American English has this, 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 this," and I listen to these sounds, and a lot of them, they just not only do they not sound like the sounds that they're supposed to be, they definitely don't sound American, like the American quality of those sounds. Especially like the schwa, it's like or something like that. It's like what is going on there? Okay, let me try to look this up. I'll just see what sound comes up. Nasal palatal approximate. I don't see an audio recording listed. Yeah, I'm not seeing any audio. It shows on the left or on the right, it has the symbol, but it doesn't show the audio like it usually does. So I don't know. It doesn't matter. I don't care enough. As I said, if there's any sort of y in it, like that J in IPA is supposed to represent, it does not work in American English. What's the best roller coaster you've been on? Coasters for life. Okay, random from a random person. Seems like a troll, but that's not a very bad question. So I don't even like roller coasters. I really don't. The last time I was on a roller coaster, let's see, with my ex-girlfriend, she wanted to go to Knott's Berry Farm, which I had never been to. Throughout the night, I went on 3 different roller coasters, much against my preference. And it took those 3 roller coasters and my completely drained mental, emotional, and physical state after each roller coaster for ex-girlfriend to be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, this is something that really affects you negatively." And I was like, "Yes." Like she thought I just had to like get used to it. I'm just like, which I probably am too much in my head, but like roller coasters are terrifying and they just they take all of my emotional energy, all of my mental energy, and like literally when I get off the roller coaster, like I'm like shaking, like, and I have to like sit down because I can't stand. It's horrible. So I don't really like roller coasters. Moving on. Wait, hey Josh, do you know where's the bank? Yeah, that's just broken grammar. Yes, that's going back to what we were talking about before. Yeah, instead of where the bank is. Yeah, that would sound absolutely horrible. I think so. If you contract it, do you know where's the bank? It doesn't sound as horrible. Maybe it's the contracted form that doesn't sound as horrible because we almost always contract it. But it still doesn't sound good if you contract it. So yeah, I just noticed I flapped the D in different when I say completely different. Am I too lazy? Completely different. Completely different. If you're speaking really fast, that can happen. Yeah. I know that's. I think. So there's some words, some really common words. Different might be in that category. But like do, like I was saying with do and don't, because they're so very common, even if they're stressed, you really just have to be like within normal speech to be able to flap them, like normal speed. For some other cases, maybe different is, I don't know if it's in the first category or the second category, but for other cases where it is supposed to be a strong D, remember fast, like really fast speech starts to break things. And what, again, it's very logical. It's very based on the mechanics, right? This is why when I talk about the range of the D sound, I need to make that lesson too. Okay, there's the strong, right? It's on a range from fully enunciated and slower and clearer to potentially dropped, right? That's the full range. So as we get faster, we get lazier in speech, these changes start to happen. For most consonant sounds, it's just sort of a gradient. For the stop sounds, it still fits on that same scale, but there are certain triggers, like we know usually the flap, it has to be between two vowels, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So there's a little bit more that comes into it, but it still fits on the scale logically, where if we say dime, okay, it's at the start of a stressed syllable, it's going to be that nice, clearly enunciated version, nice and strong, pushed out more, we hear it very clearly. If it's the weak version number one, it's just not pushed out as much because, again, with the stop sounds, there are actual reasons for this with the stress and the not stress. It's a special group with the stops. But logically, you could think that a weaker D is sort of faster, lazier, right, than a strong D, because we're not pushing it out as much. Even though there are certain rules that tell us we have to use one or the other that triggers it based on the stress. But the theory still works in the background. Then we get to the second weak one, which is the flap D, okay, which would be a weak D that is even lazier and faster because we're not even taking the time to completely close. We're just sort of hitting that position, more or less. It depends, right? But the idea is we're trying to hit that position and then leave it instead of actually creating a full D sound. So it fits very logically on that scale, all the way until you have a potentially dropped D sound or whatever. Where it's so fast, so lazy that it just doesn't get pronounced anymore. And that's the general range concept. So if we move into super fast speech, where we're just talking like this all the time, right? And we just, okay, I'm just like, everything that comes out is like this, or even in certain phrases, like right, I said, even in certain phrases, I may have slowed down at the end there. Depending on the dynamic rhythm, we might sort of speed up a bit. But when we get into that really fast range, I think that when it comes to Ds, right? So a normal weak D, potentially, it makes sense that it could maybe potentially flap. But usually we need the two vowels, because if like you don't have the vowel before it, it's kind of hard to flap it. So it's, especially if it's like an N, it's already in that position. So it gets a little weird. It's kind of hard to physically do it. But if you had a strong D between two vowels, because if it's a weak D between two vowels, it's going to become a flap. That's the definition. But if it's a strong D between two vowels, like in this case, completely different, it would make sense. We have the ability to potentially flap because we have those two vowels, right? It's just the stress is in the way. Well, if we're going so fast, if we're speaking way over here, that we're being so fast and so lazy that stress, like we still want to hear like that increase in volume, maybe the increase in length on the syllable, but the particular sound, it can kind of, in order to speak even faster, we're not even going to push out a strong D. We're going to do like a flap D there because of this sort of speed breaking it, right? That would be my theory there. And again, we don't really care too much about this over here because it's its own little world. Finn keeps wanting to push that boundary, and we end up over here with a lot of these questions. So most of your questions, Finn, are explained by the fact that really fast speech breaks things. But yeah, now if I say that's completely different, okay, it's like I'm emphasizing it. That's a normal way to say this. It's not the way to say it, but it's a very common way. Like, oh, that's completely different. Okay, there's no way I'm going to flap that D. No way. But if I say, oh, that's completely different, completely different, completely different. So in order to speak faster, we're going to try to flap it in really, really fast speech. Okay. Possible. Yeah, possible. But notice that comes at the expense of understanding. So if you have I know, Finn, apparently you have really good pronunciation. But like, let's say you have sort of a general accent, like you say like say instead of saying completely, you say, I don't know, like completely, something like that. And then you try to flap that D, say completely different. Now it's going to be harder to understand. So you need to be on point with everything to be able to work in this really fast speed realm, because things start breaking down. If you don't have the core sounds and flow mastered, you should not be worrying about what happens over there. It doesn't matter. Alan Miranda, welcome. Sorry, it took me a second to acknowledge your existence. Same thing with Anderson is here. Yes. Thank you guys for waiting patiently as I slowly work through the questions. Number one, the two R's, we put R apostrophe S, the two R's in mirror are pronounced the same. Question mark. Okay, so if it's a question, right, because this is going back, we were talking kind of earlier with the WH questions. This doesn't have a WH word in it, but you're using statement structure. Now, if you put the two R's in mirror are pronounced the same, comma, right, question mark, you could do that. But if you don't have a question tag like that, like right or aren't they, you're using statement grammar structure to ask a question, and it doesn't work. You need to say, are the two R's in mirror pronounced the same, question mark. Again, this is one of the single biggest mistakes that non-native speakers make. And don't feel like I'm picking on you, Alan. I love it when people make mistakes like this, because it's just another opportunity for everybody to learn. Yeah, making mistakes is part of the process of learning. I know that's not your question, right? So don't worry too much about it. It's fine. So for the first question, are they pronounced the same? No. The R itself is pronounced the same. Yes, there's depending on what resource you use. If you use a lot of traditional resources for American English, and when it comes, especially, this is another reason why I forgot to add this into the IPA lesson. Like when it comes to the, I'm probably gonna have like a second lesson, like 3 more reasons why you shouldn't learn the IPA. But if you look at like the IPA for the R and how it's transcribed, like there's so many different like little ways of transcribing it, and if it's like combined with the schwa or not combined with the schwa, and like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense, especially because like there's like the consonant and then the vowel, right? We're not even talking about R colored, because obviously that's a diphthong, just the vowel and the consonant. Most resources will use 2 different symbols for this. When that doesn't make any sense to me, because when I do an sound, it doesn't matter if it's a consonant, it doesn't matter if it's a vowel. If it's an R-colored vowel, yes, we need to start in a different place. But the itself in those R-colored vowels, and the vowel, and the R consonant, it's the same exact sound. And maybe there are probably some people, like maybe people from, that speak in a neutral accent, because there's more than one neutral accent. Maybe they speak in the traditional neutral accent that they teach you, and they do make a slight difference between the R consonant and the R vowel. And so they use 2 different symbols, but you don't have to do that to sound natural, to sound neutral. You can just do the exact same sound. The R consonant is generally nice and short, run. Okay, it could be deeper, it could be a little lazier, doesn't really matter. There's a bit of a range to it, but it's the same basic sound. Okay, the R vowel, the vowel sound, like in water, okay, or at the end of mirror, is the same exact sound as the R consonant. It's just a little bit longer relative, not because of the stress. Usually the stress makes things longer or shorter in English, but compared to the R consonant, the R vowel, is just a little bit longer. So if I were to say run with the vowel, it would be run. If I were to say earth, which has the consonant, with the the R vowel, if I were to say it with the consonant instead, it'd be like earth, which works out anyway, because it just sounds like I'm saying earth really fast. That's another reason why I say they're the same sound. Now, when we're talking about R colored vowels, Again, depending on the resource, you're going to get different ones. Like there's like the ar and marry or whatever. English Hacks makes it very simple. There's 4 R-colored vowels, just 4 that you have to know. There's, and I'm going to go backwards because of your question. There's or, okay, possibly or if you don't use the cot-cot merger, but I teach you with the cot-cot merger because it's easier, still very neutral and natural sounding. So or, it's an R-colored O. There's R-colored ah, merged ah. There's air, which is the R-colored eh, like in bed. And then there's the R-colored e or eh. Okay. It doesn't matter which one you use. You can be between the two. It doesn't matter. Okay. So the first R sound in mirror, you can say it ear. You can say it ear with either E or I going into R. Okay. The end point is the same. It's but the starting point can be E, I, or anything in between. So you can say mirror. You can say mirror. Mirror, doesn't matter. Okay. Then you have to reproduce just a regular vowel that's not R-colored. Okay, so mirror or mirror. Okay, but if you can actually reduce the word mirror to mere, which sounds exactly like this word, M-E-R-E. So again, you can use the E or the I, it doesn't matter, but you can actually drop that second vowel and say, like, look in the mirror, look in the mirror. It's perfectly fine. It's a very common reduction for this word because it's kind of hard to say those 2 R's next to each other. So we just drop the vowel at the end. Number 2, flap D and dental D can sound similar in fast speech. So that's kind of what I was just talking about. Oh no, that's not what I was talking about. Dental D. No. Not in any way. No. Okay. See, I knew from the beginning I should have picked different terminology. So I have to always emphasize and reiterate, which is fine. But the fact that in American English, what is, okay, when we talk about a dental D and a dental T, if we're zooming out of the context of American English and just talking about sounds, right? So there's like Spanish sounds, English sounds, German sounds, any kind of sounds, right, that are in language. The sound that is produced for the and t, they technically don't have to touch the teeth, but they commonly do, and they're flatter, they're duller. And so they're commonly called dental D, dental T, right? It's a type of T or D sound. And that's fine. If you go to Spanish, that is the T and D sound, right? This is just what they call a T and a D. In American English, this is very, very important. I want everybody to listen very, very carefully. Burn this into your brain. In the context of American English, when we talk about a dental D and a dental T, they are not D sounds or T sounds. Okay, it's not a D, it's not a T. What is commonly called outside of American English dental T and dental D, within American English is a TH. It's not a D or a T. It's a TH, a voiced TH or a voiceless TH. So what I want you to do in your brain is I want you to say, okay, if it's a dental D, that equals, okay, dental D equals voiced TH. It is in no way, in the context of American English, it is in no way, shape, or form a D sound. It is a TH sound. Because the dental D in American English is a replacement for the voiced TH. It is not used to replace a D sound. If you do that, you will give yourself an accent. If you say, instead of saying do, you say do, you have an accent. You cannot do that. It doesn't matter if it's flapped. It doesn't matter if it's not flapped, which it would be physically impossible for the flap. But it doesn't matter what kind of D you're doing, or what kind of T if it's a dental T. It doesn't matter what kind of D you're doing, what kind of T you're doing. You cannot, in American English, you cannot replace it with a dental version, because that will give you an accent. It only replaces the THs. Okay, so in American English, even though this is generally not true outside of American English, it would be called a dental T or dental D. In American English, dental D is a TH. You can think of it as a dental TH if you want. That's fine. Okay, where it's the TH is flat. I probably should have used that term when I started talking about it. I didn't realize it was going to be such a big thing. So that's my fault, but it is what it is. I can maybe try to rebrand it and save it, but we'll see. Same thing with the T. Okay, so there's no dental T. Dental D and dental T do not exist as T and D sounds in English. In American English specifically, they only exist as TH sounds. Okay, so when you're talking about the flap D, okay, so that doesn't necessarily erase your question. So the flap D is, which there's a couple different ways to do it depending on what the next sound is, but generally you go up here, you tap, you flap. You're not touching the teeth. Okay, flap. Da, 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 da. It doesn't matter how fast I'm speaking. Da, 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 da. Okay. Obviously, if you go too slow, you can't flap anymore because you're enunciating. So a fully enunciated D would just be either a weak D, first weak D, or maybe even a stronger D, but you need the stress to do that. Okay. The dental doesn't flap. Okay. Again, it represents a TH sound. So if I do the, in order for me to try to flap that, I would have to do something like like it's almost impossible. It's really hard to do in my mouth. It just doesn't really work. In fact, if anything, it starts becoming a regular TH kind of. So no, no, not in any way. So I want you to completely disconnect those two in your brain. What is the difference between R in rapid and flower? The first thing I described. The R in rapid is the R consonant, which is relatively shorter than the R vowel. So you can call it the consonant, the R. We call it the letter R. The name of the letter is R. So sometimes you'll hear me say the R consonant or the R vowel. And I'm just referring to the basic sound, not any R colored sound like R. Is actually the R colored ah, and it get confusing. So sometimes I'll say R because that's the name of the letter. Which I probably shouldn't do. But then you also hear me say consonant, vowel. I mean the same thing. So the keep things simple. The consonant and the vowel, the vowel is relatively longer. So the R in rapid or the in rapid is just a little shorter. And then the in flower is a little bit longer. That's the only difference. Some speakers will produce them slightly differently, apparently. You don't have to. It's not required. You'll still sound perfectly natural. You'll sound perfectly neutral. If you produce them exactly the same, you just make the consonant a little bit shorter. That's it. More videos about eating vowels. Yes, I'm kind of figuring out what exactly I'm going to do moving forward. I'm sort of in a transition period because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the live stream, I think I'm working on a big intonation lesson. It's probably going to be the last big lesson in the main pronunciation course. I do have quite a few extra practice lessons planned and some more minimal pair lessons planned. One of the extra practice lessons is some more examples of vowel eating, but I'm also going to try to work that concept into just like sentence analysis, listening analysis lessons like I did before. I'm trying to come up with sort of a format where And I think I did a couple of these at some point where there's like, maybe it could be an idiom, it could be a phrase, it could be even be something like from one of you guys, like maybe you submit things to me and then I make content based around it, where we look at like the grammar, the pronunciation, like the meaning and all this stuff, and I just make like a whole lesson around this particular phrase or maybe sentence that was submitted. And we all learn from that. And so I apply a lot of my techniques. Like we might be talking about the logic of prepositions, like, oh, hey, so, whether you use the right preposition or not, but especially if you use the wrong preposition, like let's say you used in, but it's supposed to be on. I say, okay, well, we actually say on here. This is why, according to the logic of on. So you get some of that in there. And then we can break down the pronunciation, the flow of the sentence, and say, okay, this is, the linking, this is the flow, this is how it would be fully enunciated. This is like, we eat some vowels, we can eat this here, eat that there. And so you get that full range of how the sentence could possibly be pronounced by a native. So we're talking about like the meaning, this preposition logic stuff, pronunciation, all in sort of like one lesson. I'm thinking of maybe kind of doing some content like that. So I don't know what you guys think about that, but yeah. And I think it would be very, very useful to have you guys submit stuff. Not that I would talk about live, because I know you guys have questions. I really like this format, just like answering your guys' questions. But if some of you wanted to submit some audio samples to like my email or whatever, number one, you'll get feedback, right? So I can correct your pronunciation, I can correct your grammar, I can correct all this stuff. But then on top of that, right, in this video lesson that I would record, on top of that, not only do you get the corrections and the feedback, but everybody gets to learn, right? So you have to be comfortable with people listening to your voice and listening to the mistakes you might make. But everybody gets to learn from that. And I'll add those extra layers, like the logic of prepositions and all that stuff onto it. So, that one little sentence submission that you send me becomes a whole lesson that everybody can learn from in different ways. Now, because that's probably going to be kind of involved, that's going to be very heavy, probably on the editing. I would like to have an editor before I do that. So I don't know. I'm kind of in a transition period right now with what I'm going to do moving forward. There's going to be more extra practice lessons coming for sure. I decided to move because I was going to do a whole series on like the range and flow. I still am going to do it for the stop sounds, especially the T and D, as like a separate lesson. But I've decided to merge the range and flow of most sounds into the mouth posture stuff, because in the mouth posture, like the vowel master class that I'm going to be making later, it's already going to include like, okay, this is like a fully enunciated, E, and then this is like a lazier E, or fully enunciated a lazier so we're naturally going to kind of talk about that range anyway. So I'm just going to, instead of making separate lessons for that, I'm going to merge that into the vowel master class, the consonant master class as well for the consonant sounds with the mouth posture. So that's all going to be coming with that, which leaves me almost no pronunciation, main material left. I'm supposed to be working on the verb book, which I have not been doing, honestly. I keep telling myself I have to, and then it just doesn't happen because I have so many things I'm trying to do. So I don't know. I'm in a weird spot right now with content, but things are coming. I have lots of plans. There's definitely things coming. It's just, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do over the next couple months of the exact content I'm going to be producing. So yeah. Now, if I had an editor, I'd be able to pump out a bunch of content regularly on various things. But I don't have an editor, so I only have so much I can do. Okay, so in the phrase completely different, there's no flat D, there's only glottal held. You might maybe you're talking about the T in completely can be a stop T. It's definitely not the D in different. That definitely wouldn't be a stop D. But I already answered that. What does flex mean? Oh, yeah, so Abdullah, in case you don't know, so Finn is very advanced, and a lot of the questions that Finn sends are, as I said, a lot of his questions tend to push that line between like normal speech and really fast speech where things break. So, because I've had other people comment on Finn's stuff and be like, "Hey, this blah, blah, blah." It's like, well, as a native, if I speak really fast, yeah, technically Finn is correct. So that's its own little thing. Don't worry too much about it. What does flex mean? Examples: real flex is staying. Ha ha! I saw that in my YouTube feed earlier. Yeah, that guy popped up out of nowhere. I don't even know who he is. But anyway, what's the biggest flex in your country? Those are the examples I saw. I failed. Okay, that's a different thing. So yeah, flex. This is a slang term. Literally, flex is this. I'm flexing my muscle. Right? It doesn't have to be my arm. It could be whatever. And you're sort of tensing and usually it's used like physically. It's just flex. Right? There's like flexion, inflection. Right? That's where it comes from. It started to get right like, oh, guys, they have big muscles and like show off like, oh yeah, check it out, right? See if I flex. It's like, oh, it's so cool, right? So it started to get this meaning of like not just physically flexing, but also like, oh, showing off. Okay. And then that eventually took on a more abstract meaning of no longer physically flexing to show off your body, but actually like doing something or trying to have some sort of like appearing to be smart or something. Like let's say I wanted to be cool in front of people, and so I start speaking what sounds like a foreign language, but it's not actually a foreign language, but they don't know because I can do it in a convincing way, right? It sounds like it should be a foreign language, but I'm just saying blah blah blah. That might be a form of flexing. Like I'm trying to give an appearance of like, oh, I'm so cool. Oftentimes it is rooted in something that you actually can do or that you do have. It could even be like, oh, I have a fancy car, right? You're flexing, showing like, I have a lot of money, right? That's what the fancy car means. I have a lot of money, so I can afford this car. You're flexing because you're driving your fancy car around and being like, hey, look at my car, right? So it can get very abstract, but it's this idea of sort of showing off. May or may not be rooted in something that you can actually do or have, but often is rooted in something that you can do or have. And it's largely about appearances, right? Basically pretending to be something you're not, or showing off something that you think makes you cool, but maybe it doesn't. Most people probably won't think it does. So there you go. That's what that means. So in this context, the real flex is staying grateful even when times are tough. So he's sort of doing, there's some layers here. I don't want to take the time to go in and explain all the details. I think based on my explanation of flex, you should get the basic idea, but he has some layers here. So if he's saying the real flex, obviously like, okay, well, what would people normally do when times are tough? How would they flex? Okay. And then he's saying like, oh, well, whatever you would do, that's not the real flex. Like the real flex, the real way to like, be cool is to stay grateful, right? Because a lot of times people use flex in more of a positive term, and they tend to use it negatively when it's annoying, right? So it's like, oh, don't flex, like you're not cool. But then it's like, oh, hey, yeah, like I don't want to flex, but like I don't want to show off, I don't want to brag, but blah blah blah. And maybe you're legitimately not trying to show off, but you want to say this thing like I can say I don't want to flex, but I'm talented at pronunciation. I could say maybe something like that. So anyway, you get the idea. Biggest flex in your country, that one doesn't really make much sense to me. So I don't really know. But I failed the dental D and regular D test in one of your latest videos. I got all the rest right, though. Even the bonus part, maybe I was lucky. I mean, why there? I can't filter the difference between the two at all. I kept replaying it quite a few times since you posted, but no success in making the distinction. And I forget for a moment about the two options and their spelling. then that just becomes impossible. Do you think I'll ever be able to master it? I mean, if I can't filter them as being different, how can I hear it? Which more natural is if I can't tell them apart. If I can't tell them apart, how can I hear it or even make it? Oh, I see what you mean. You filter them like your brain filtering, your ears filtering. Like that does work. That's okay. Anyway, so yeah, it's tough. It could be tough. Some sounds are going to be so similar that you try and you try and you try and you're just like, I can't hear it. Minimal pairs, in my experience and based off the research I've seen, minimal pairs will usually fix at least most of that problem. If you've gone through that several times, you still are just like, I have no idea. Clearly the minimal pairs aren't working. Or at least they're not working yet. There could be several things going on here. It could have a little bit to do with, I don't really want to put it this way because it kind of starts sounding weird, but with like your brain wiring or whatever, like we're all a little bit different or whatever. I'm not saying like you have oh, your brain is stupid or something. But it could be maybe for this particular thing, hearing the difference between sounds. Like, I don't know if you've generally had a lot of problems hearing the difference between new sounds, just like in English or if you've learned other languages in general. If so, that could be a bigger pattern that shows that maybe you might be below average in this, or it could have something to do with your native language. That's more often the case usually. Like, for example, Japanese. I like using Japanese because it's such an easy example, because there's relatively so few sounds in Japanese. They tend to have a lot of problems, like between R and L, right? Rock and lock. Most Japanese speakers won't hear any difference, even though to me as an English speaker, they're obviously two very completely different sounds. They're not even close. But Japanese speakers won't hear the difference because they don't have an they don't have an they have something that is their R that we transcribe as an R is kind of like a blend between a D and an L that we would think of in English, like kind of like that. So I can't even do it. But it's almost sort of like a flat D kind of in a way, but not quite. Point is that for Japanese speakers, because they have so few sounds, right? If you give them minimal pairs rock lock, it might take them a while to even just start hearing the difference, right? Like, because you can guess and maybe you get less than chance, right? Which I think chance is like 50% or something like that. Yeah. Now, if you can start guessing at 60%, 70%, 80% of the time, okay, now you're starting to get somewhere. But if you're just like, it's a game of chance. I have no idea what's going on. I can't hear it. If you keep going, eventually you should get it. That being the case, obviously, if you keep replaying this particular video, you're going to start memorizing the answers at some point, and that's not going to help you. So there is my ear trainer, which is still currently only available for Windows, unfortunately. So if you have Windows, and you can use my ear trainer, it's linked in the description. I'm pretty sure I put the dental versions in there. So you should be able to choose, say, like T and dental T, and then just like play them. It'll just go for infinity, basically. Like, you can just keep like play. It'll play one of them. You guess which one it is. It'll show you, and then let you hear both of them, just like you see in the video, more or less, except it'll just be the sound without any words. And that way you're not even worried about the words and stuff. It's literally just the sounds themselves. And if you keep doing that, you just keep getting that high iteration, high volume of guessing, 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 and just keep doing that for, I would say, at least 10, 15 minutes a day. I wouldn't go more than an hour a day for this particular exercise. It's probably gonna be way too much. But if you do like 10, 15 minutes a day, just doing that, probably within a week, but at the most, maybe within a month. If you still don't see any progress after a month of doing that 10 to 15 minutes a day, then I'm not really sure, and I would have to like dig deeper with you personally and figure out what's going on there, because it wouldn't make any sense to me. But yes, I do very strongly believe that you'll be able to master it. You just, at the end of the day, your brain just needs enough food. And I don't mean physical food. Obviously, you need to eat. Yes, that helps. But whatever it is that you're learning, it needs enough food, whether you're practicing the output of it, or more importantly and more directly, you're getting the input of it. It needs that exposure, that experience. And the more experience it gets, the more food it ggets, the more interaction it gets with the thing you're trying to learn, especially if it's high iterations with like subtle changes. So like not minimal pairs, micro adjustments when you're trying to find a new sound and stuff like that. In this case, it's just high iterations of trying to hear the difference between two sounds and guessing. The more that you do that, the more that your brain is going to start to notice the subtle differences. And this is actually, I like to mention this because so different languages treat colors differently, and it actually affects your perception, your physical perception, which is very fascinating. But there's this one tribe, I think in Africa or something, I forget. But they have like a bunch of different words for green, right? And in English, I mean, we have the idea of green, and we can change it to like, okay, lime green and like, dark green, light green, and we can give different shades and different specific, but we generally think of like there's green, right? Like a lime green, we think of it's sort of like a yellowish green, right? So that's actually like two colors, but green is green. So we have this, there's different shades, but this one language from this tribe, because they have so many words for like different shades, if you show them like a wheel with a bunch of different greens, like they're almost the same, they're just little tiny shades different throughout the whole wheel. Me as an English speaker, when I looked at it, I was like, they're all the same color. It's all exactly the same shade of green. And I had to sit there and stare at it for maybe like 10 seconds before I could start to see that, oh, this one is a little different. Where this tribe, somebody who speaks this language, they would immediately be able to pick out the one that was different, right? Or the slightly different shades. So now you could say, okay, that's a native language thing, whatever. But the point is that that doesn't seem related. It's kind of unrelated. Point is that the more food you give your brain, the more that you try to make it notice the difference between things, or to make it make a difference between things. Like if you're doing micro adjustments between sounds and stuff, the more that it's going to become kind of familiar. For some people, it takes longer. For a very small minority of people, it probably is not possible. That's a very small minority of people. You are most likely not in that group. But that's true probably with pretty much everything. Like everybody has things that they're weak at. And for them just to get up to the average, it might take a gigantic amount of work that wouldn't even be worth it. But most people would be in average for most things. And as long as you're within average, you stand a very good chance of being able to master everything you need to master, or at least getting it close enough to reach your particular goals. Which, by the way, you don't always have to notice the difference. The ear training really helps to open things up for like your general listening. Obviously, it helps you to be able to produce the difference between the sounds, which you can also try playing with actually the physical creation of it that's linked to your ears. And just physically doing the difference, knowing that, okay, this one isn't dental, this one is dental. That's going to give your brain a more physical sensation of what the difference between sounds is, and that can help open your ears too. So you can try that as well. I was saying something before, whatever. Anyway, you get the point. That happened because I used to hear stuff like, I hate that guy so bad instead of so badly. Wait. Okay, so those are plain to fin. Not the completely different. I hate that guy so bad. That guy so bad. Okay, whatever. Seems weird to him. Okay, Ertroxylon. Welcome. Our resident transformer. Hello. Are words like cutting, pudding generally pronounced with the flapped T? Okay, because when you reduce them, like for example, cutting, you use the held T. God damn it. All right, so back to the beginning of the live stream. I know you weren't here. So I was talking about this earlier because it was relevant to a question. Number one, and I know you've probably heard this before. Maybe you just happen to not be here with the many times I've said it. But there is no flap T. Flap T does not exist. Okay, it's flap D because it's a D sound. It's voiced. T is not voiced. Okay, it's not like cutting. That would be a flap T. Doesn't exist. Okay, it's a D sound. Spelled with a T. That's why most teachers call it a flap T. Not actually a T sound. Okay, so are words like cutting and pudding generally pronounced with a flap D? Yes, they are. Because when you reduce them, for example, cutting, use a held T. Okay. Yes and no. Yes and no. So, again, there's a reason for this. There's two different things that can apply here. When we're talking about the ing ending of verbs, it doesn't matter if you do n or ng. This is a different problem that we talked about before. If you are doing the full version of it, you're not reducing it to in, which would be the more informal sounding version of the ing ending. As long as you're not doing that, then we're going to flap the T into a flap D. Unless maybe you choose to push out that T and say it very clearly, like, I don't know, I'm cutting it right now. Possible that it can come out as a T if you're clearly enunciating it for some reason, but 99.9% of the time it's going to be a flap D. Okay. However, what happens if we switch to this more informal version where we say in? Okay. Well, now we have a T in the middle, which is at the start of an unstressed syllable. We have a small little vowel, e, which is in an unstressed syllable. Could be maybe reduced to even. Okay. And then we have an N. Well, that seems like a pattern that we know about, like maybe mountain or Britain. Same thing, cutting. Okay. Now, can you still flap it and turn into a flap D? If I say I'm cutting some paper, I'm cutting some paper, cutting. Flap D plus in. Yeah, you could do that too. Perfectly possible, perfectly fine. No problem with that whatsoever. You can even say cutting. I'm cutting some paper. Now, especially because it's already reduced and it's informal, that's going to be like almost impossible because you're reducing the end of the word. So why would you push out the T to say the full pronunciation of the word when you're reducing the end of the word? So that kind of clashes. And so I would say that probably isn't going to work in that particular case. But the flap definitely, or optionally in this case, you have two options. You have the flap or you have the held T, which would both be common options with that reduced ending. Because that's a different rule that follows a different pattern, right? Now, in the case of Britain, right, we don't say Britain. Well, I guess we could Britain. If we say more clearly, we'd probably say Britain, push out the T. But we do say British. We don't say British. That sounds like Cockney British pronunciation. British. We say British. Or more clearly enunciated British with an actual pushed out T. So some words are just a little different, but there is a general pattern here with this sort of T small vowel that you can sort of eat, and then an N where you can apply that sort of held rule instead of flapping into the vowel. So you have two options there. Which category the roller coaster is in? What? Okay, so another problem. See, as I said, guys, this is a super common problem. Which cat? So this is a question, right? Which category is? That's the question format, right? If I say, okay, if I say, okay, I guess that's kind of weird in this case. We're not gonna worry about that. But yeah, which category is the roller coaster in? Question mark. Or that is the category which the roller coaster is in, period. Okay, so which category is the roller coaster in? Is it a toy or a play? My sentence, I can't get myself in a toy like a roller coaster because I simply understand it as being dangerous. I can relate. Okay. Well, it's not a play. A play would be like on stage when we use a play as a noun like that. It's not a toy. I see what your question is. If you talk about a toy roller coaster, that sounds like you literally you just have like a little model roller coaster and you can like play with it. That would be a toy. A roller coaster is a ride. That's what it would be. It would be categorized under rides. So it's a ride. Yep. Anything at a theme park or like a water park where you have, we say, things that you go on, right? So there's like slides, there's roller coasters, there's Ferris wheels, there's those things that spin around this way, there's the carousel and the horses that go around. Okay, all of these are rides. You are riding on that thing that it takes you, either from point A to point B or in a circle or whatever it is. They're all rides. Yeah. Okay. Hey, I almost caught up. Yay. Hope I didn't skip anything. Sometimes the chat does that to me. Okay. Welcome, Jonathan. Yes. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So, Delio, is there a short, maybe slangy way of saying megabytes? I know for gigabytes it's gigs. Very nice. So I was wondering if there's something similar for megabytes. Technically, yes, but it's a lot less common because maybe back in the 90s, I don't know, megabytes would be more of the size that we would talk about. But I mean, we already have terabytes now. Even I think we're getting into, what is it, picobytes or something. So yeah, gigabytes are just sort of the standard amount, like bracket that we talk about in terms of size of storage. So that's the one that tends to get reduced to gigs. Yeah, it's 20 gigs. The reduction for megabytes would be megs. Yeah, like it's 100 megs. But we don't usually talk about megabytes. We talk about things in terms of gigabytes. Now, if something is exceedingly small, well, it might even go down to kilobytes. Like a document might only be, like, I don't know, 800 kilobytes if it's a really small text document or something. So we you don't really hear megabytes too much. You don't hear megs. And we don't say like kilos for kilobytes. That just makes us think of kilograms, even though we don't really use that measurement because we hear it being used for that. So megs does exist, but not as common. We don't usually talk about it. By the way, talk about slangy words. Yeah, what's a word? I don't know. Talking about slangy words. Is that common to use locks instead of dreadlocks and fit instead of outfit? Locks instead of dreadlocks. So locks can be used as a synonym for hair, particularly long hair. It doesn't have to be dreadlocks. In fact, dreadlocks comes from this use of locks, meaning hair. It's just that what kind of locks are they? So you might say like, oh, she has really long locks. We don't really use that word like that anymore. It's sort of an older, dated word. There's a fairy tale, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's Goldilocks because she had blonde hair, she had golden hair, and so Goldilocks, golden hair, right? A girl with gold hair or blonde hair. Um, I think there's another one. What is it? Anyway, um, so dreadlocks would be, the dread is the style of locks. I don't know where the dread part came from, but um, yeah. So it's actually tied to an older use of the word. It's not a reduction for dreadlocks. Now, maybe people use that to refer to dreadlocks these days. I don't know. I don't know many people with dreadlocks. I'm not really into much of the culture for people who usually have dreadlocks. So I don't get exposed to that use of the word if it is a reduction for that. Fit for outfit, no, not in my experience. Maybe some Gen Zs are doing that. I don't know, but in my experience, no. I feel so old now. I'd be like, well, maybe the crazy Gen Z youngsters are, at it again because I'm just a, millennial. God, I'm old, getting old. Anyway, moving on. Outfit. It's a nice outfit. That's a nice fit. See, because that actually has a different meaning. If you say like, oh, that's a nice fit, as long as it's clear that you're talking about their clothes. Number one, if there's no context, like if you just go up to like, especially let's say a woman and you say that's a nice fit, that could be potentially very offensive. Like you're hitting on her. You're gonna say, oh yeah, you're super hot, you're super attractive because fit, right? Like, okay, I'm sure you get it. So no, don't do that. But that aside, provided the context is clear and all this stuff, it would probably be interpreted as because like let's say I say I put on a shirt or whatever, and then I'm like, I come to you and I'm like, well, what do you think? And I turn around and I show you, and you're like, oh, it's a nice fit. I mean, like, oh, it fits you well. So you're not talking about an outfit, you're talking about how the clothes fit on my body. So I would be very surprised if outfit were reduced to fit. It would be confusing to me. Okay, Alan, when you say breathy, I think of Marilyn Monroe. I'll have to look that up. I'm not familiar with how she speaks. But generally, I would say no, because it's the way that all American, well, I guess I can't say all necessarily, but it's the way that American English is generally spoken. It has a little more breath than your language, probably. I can't say for every language, but based on my experience so far. Marilyn Monroe. So it's not like a way that a particular American speaks. It's the way that American English is generally spoken. Let's see here. Marilyn Monroe. Interview. Let's see. Okay, so number one. Okay, so this is an interview from 1955. Obviously, Marilyn Monroe is from a little bit of a different time. And the speech was perhaps slightly different in some ways. What I'm hearing from her in terms of this breathiness, I see why you would point me in that direction. I think that she is probably using about maybe a little tiny bit more, but I think it's about the same amount of breath that you would want to use just speaking American English in general, except she has this sound that like a lot of women that you hear from that period, like in TV or whatever, they tend to have, which again, this is a blanket statement. This is just pop culture references and what I've been exposed to as a native speaker. But a lot of women from the cinema or the media of that time, they have this type of Marilyn Monroe voice where it's kind of like it's higher. And I think a lot of women may have like artificially made it a little higher because it sounds more feminine, sounds more, womanly or whatever. And they maybe tend to either add a little extra breath on top of it, or because of the way that they're speaking, that breath is a little easier to hear. Because listening to her in that little interview clip I just looked up, it just sounds like 1950s, 1960s television woman. Like, it doesn't sound like Marilyn Monroe. It sounds like a woman from that era in the media. Again, it's a blanket statement. It's a generalization, but kind of hard to explain exactly what I'm saying. So yes and no, kind of. I wouldn't necessarily use Marilyn Monroe as the model. But if you were to use about the same amount of breath, maybe tone it down just a little bit, your breathing would probably be really good. Yeah. I learned a lot here. Perfect. Awesome. Well, good, Jonathan. Thanks for letting me know. Yep, you should have called dental TH. Called it, yeah. Sorry about native speakers. Drop the LY. Oh, I see. Yeah, I should have called it dental TH. I should have. I think there was a reason why I chose not to, and I can't remember what that reason was. I think I even asked you guys. It was probably before you were a subscriber, Abdullah, because this was a while ago. I don't know how long you've been a subscriber, but I think I asked. I asked, like, would it be more confusing or this or that, or like, what do you think? And anyway, regardless, I mean, it is technically a D sound or a T sound. It's not being produced in the normal place that an American one is. It's just that it's used to replace the THs. That's the only disconnect. So I don't know. You could go either way, and for whatever reason, I decided to keep the T and D there instead of the TH. I don't know. Wendell, is it matter? Does it matter not pronouncing final Z sound in because? Could that be a full dropping? Do natives drop it instead? They say an S at the end. Okay, so number one, so if you drop it, it's going to disappear. It's not going to be changed into something. Dropping is dropping. Okay, so that would be because. Okay, so so your question isn't can it be full dropping? I mean, can it be a full change into an S? No. Because that's what it would be. Because again, it's this partial end of word devoicing. You're hearing an S because there is an S being pronounced. It's a very common thing, but it's not a straight. It's not to s. It's to a quick little z and then into a s. Because see now, and if I say, you might be like, okay, I can hear the Z, but then if I speak quickly, well, I wanted to do it because I didn't have time, because I see, I can kind of still, I can easily, because the next sound is voice, I can just keep the Z, but I can also go to that partial end of word devoicing. It can work. If I say because, let me make a simpler example. Because something happened, especially if the next sound is an S, it's pretty much guaranteed we're going to do that partial end of word devoicing. But if I make because into a straight S and I say because something, now it sounds like because You're starting to actually break down the word because on the stressed syllable, and it's actually being reduced because the Z there isn't there to buffer between the transition to the S. You have to do the S. The word is because. You cannot change it to an S. You can partial end of word devoice the Z into an S. But you have to start in the Z. Okay. Where can I support you? It's a good question. Well, there is a couple options. If you want a recurring support, there's YouTube memberships that you can sign up for. Under this video, there should be a blue join button. You can join the channel. There's certain perks or benefits that you get depending on what level you choose. There's also Patreon, which I tried to make largely in line with the YouTube memberships, but because of some differences in the platforms, I can't do it exactly. On Patreon, certain levels actually have merchandise. If you're at that level for, I think, 3 months, you'll actually be sent some merchandise. One is like a sticker. At a little bit of a higher level, you can get a VIP English X t-shirt. As part of your like recurring subscription to support me. So you can go check out either one, YouTube memberships or Patreon. The Patreon should be linked in the description as well. Or if you want to do more of just like not a recurring monthly thing, because I have small options like $2 to $5 on both those platforms if you just want to do a little bit. But if you want to do not recurring, but just like, hey, I want to support you here and I want to support you there. Of course, there's things like super chats. They recently released super thanks. So any video that I have, you can click the super thanks button under the video and like donate a certain amount as thanks for that particular lesson. So there's numerous ways, but YouTube memberships and Patreon would be the recurring monthly places you can do that. Of course, you can cancel them at any time. There's no contract or anything. It's just a month to month. So yeah, I appreciate that you want to support the channel. Thank you very much. Abdullah, I think it's possible to be dropped in this case because she. Okay. That, yeah, because I think earlier I said like you're not going to drop the Z because the word is because, right? Now there's potential linking rules that can change things, right? If it's just the word because, or if it's just flowing into some random word, you need something there. You're not going to completely drop the sound. It's either there needs to be at least some Z, and whether it's a full Z or Z into S, that's possible, but completely dropping it. So if we say because and she, let's see. Because she. Yes, here it can work. And this has to do with the closeness in relative sound and that was my phone. Sorry. Closeness in relative sound and physical creation in the mouth between the S and Z and the SH or the sh and j. Especially for speaking faster, more lazily, you can definitely drop that z and just go into the sh. So we're not changing it into an S either. We are completely dropping the sound due to linking into that SH. That is possible, yes. But that's because of this particular combination. Good. Anyway, I don't know what else we have. Oh, it's 1:44. We're out of time. I didn't even realize time flies. So I guess I have to go. Because Sam. Well, that's going into an S. So as I was saying, because Sam, you can't drop it. You can't say because Sam. Maybe if you're speaking really, really fast, yes. In the flow of normal speech, even on the faster end, you want to hit, you can sort of drop most of the sound, but you have to hit still a little bit of that Z. Like because Sam. As long as you hit a little bit of that Z, it's going to be fine in the flow of normal speech. If I say because Sam, because Sam, because Sam, it doesn't sound right. At least to me. Anyway, okay, so thank you guys very much. I do have to go. Time flies, time flies. I was going to mention something before I go. What was it? Oh, yeah, the thing I mentioned earlier. So if you guys want to send things to my email, like, I mean, not something crazy long. Don't, send like 10 different files to me. If you want to send in a couple recordings of yourself saying a particular sentence, it could be maybe with some sounds that you have trouble with, or maybe it's, you're working on stress, whatever it is, you can add notes about that. But you can send me a recording of you saying a sentence. And with the specific understanding that I will make a video about that for everybody, right? So your audio will be in there. Corrections for grammar and pronunciation will be in there. If you're okay with that, you can send me maybe a recording or two to my email, which you can find on my about page of my channel. And I'm going to consider making some content based around your guys' submissions. And we'll see how that goes. So just throwing that out there. If nobody cares, then that's fine. Nobody has to submit anything. You just won't get any feedback. So thank you guys very much. I will see you all next week, same time. Oh yeah, Abdullah, I still have to answer your question if you're still here. I would much rather do that here really, really quick instead of typing it out, especially because it's a pronunciation question. So I hope you're still here. Your question, you're talking on the dental TD variation of the TH sounds. You posted the question, so okay, this equals dental D, this equals dental T. In the word birthday, can I pronounce it as like birthday? My question actually is, when I have a TH plus T, can I just change one of them to a dental and leave the other one? I hope my question is clear. Okay, so what can happen here? You can say birthday, so you have a TH and a D. Okay. You can say birthday. So that is when, and I think I talked about it in that lesson, the only time that you can do a regular T or D as a dental version is if there's a TH before it. Because instead of doing birthday, right, obviously it's just easier to release the D from there. So you do a dental T, but you don't release it. When you release a dental D for the D and day. Birthday. That's going to be probably the most common standard thing to do. Okay. I think that either that answers your question or what I'm about to say will answer your question. There is sort of an in-between thing that can happen. It's not standard. It's just something that can happen where like maybe you do birth and then like you're going towards that dental T, like you're going to make it this way, but you start in like a regular T and then you end up flattening it and then it becomes a D. So because you can do that dental and then make that regular D a dental because of the TH, technically this is an in-between thing we can do where you actually do a regular TH to make it flat and then push out the D as a dental D. That can happen. Birthday. So possibility, yes. Hopefully that will answer your question. I think that's what you were asking, more or less. So there's an extra possibility there, but the standard thing that we would probably maybe expect more would be just to do dental T release into dental D. So good. Okay, so now I'm going to go. Thank you guys very much. I will see you next time. Okay.